Hello, and thank you for joining me today. My name is Julie Sikowski, and I'm a registered dietitian with Wellspring Cardiology. Today, I will be guiding you through the components of a heart-healthy diet. Our objectives for today will be to identify which nutrients have a significant impact on our heart health. I'm going to discuss the dietary guidelines as well as the American Heart Association recommendations for a heart-healthy eating pattern. And then we're going to take those recommendations and learn how to read the nutrition facts label to help us adhere to a heart-healthy diet. Let's first review the seriousness of heart disease in our country. Heart disease remains the #1 cause of death in the United States, with 1 in every 3 deaths contributed to heart disease. Every 40 seconds, someone has a heart attack. That's 90 people every hour. Adults with diabetes are 2 to 4 times more likely to die from heart disease. Preventive treatment that reduces cardiovascular disease by even a small percentage can substantially reduce the number of people who develop this disease and the costs of caring for them. While there are some risk factors for heart disease that are out of our control, such as increasing age, gender, heredity, there are multiple risk factors that we can work to help control. The American Heart Association has developed this tool called Life Simple 7, defined as the 7 risk factors that people can improve through lifestyle changes to help achieve ideal cardiovascular health. So while today we'll be discussing eating better to help lower our risk of heart disease, I want you to take a look at this list and think about what other risk factors up here can you start working on to help lower your risk for heart disease. Before discussing the components of a heart-healthy diet, let's review the types of fat in the blood so we can have a better understanding of how what we eat can affect these. You'll often get dietary recommendations based on your lipid panel or a set of blood work most commonly measuring the cholesterol, LDL, HDL, and triglycerides in your blood. So what is cholesterol? Cholesterol is a waxy substance produced and released into the bloodstream by your liver. The body uses cholesterol to form cell membranes, aid in digestion, convert vitamin D in the skin, and to develop hormones. So we need cholesterol, it's essential. Our body makes all of the cholesterol it needs for these essential functions though, but too much of it can become a problem. Type of fat found in our blood, another one is the LDL. This is often termed our bad cholesterol, and you can remember this as L for lousy. The LDL cholesterol delivers needed cholesterol to different parts of the body, but too much LDL in the system contributes to plaque buildup in the artery walls. This causes hardening of the arteries and slows blood flow and could lead to coronary artery disease. A heart attack can occur with too much plaque buildup, or if the plaque bursts, this causes a blood clot and blocks the flow of blood to the muscle. HDL stands for high density lipoprotein. This is our good cholesterol, and you can remember this by H for happy. Our HDL moves cholesterol from the arteries to the liver and helps protect from stroke and heart attack. So generally, it is better to have more HDL in our blood. Then we have the triglycerides, another type of fat found in the blood. When you eat, the body converts any calories it doesn't need to use right away into triglycerides. So commonly people with elevated triglycerides, I see that they have an excess amount of highly refined carbohydrate foods in their diet. So they're heavy on snacks, desserts, sugary drinks, or they tend to consume a lot of alcohol. The good news is triglycerides are easily influenced by diet and lifestyle. So cutting back on the excess intake of high carbohydrate foods or alcohol, along with increasing physical activity, can help lower these triglycerides. Healthcare providers will look at a total cholesterol as a quick way to assess a person's risk. So you can see here that we get our total cholesterol score by adding our HDL, LDL, and 20% of our triglycerides. Heart attack risk is minimized by having a lower total cholesterol, lower HDL, and a higher proportion of HDL cholesterol. So with that being said, let's shift into eating for a heart-healthy diet. About half of all American adults have one or more preventable chronic diseases, many of which are related to poor quality eating patterns and physical inactivity. So every 5 years, the Health and Human Services and the USDA publish the dietary guidelines to help Americans eat a healthier diet. A growing body of research has examined the relationship between our overall eating patterns, health, and risk of chronic disease. Eating patterns are a focus of these recommendations: a variety of vegetables, fruits, grains, fat-free, low-fat dairy, a variety of protein and oils. Most of the calories in the USDA food pattern recommended are for nutrient-dense food choices, and only a limited number remain for other uses. The latest dietary guidelines reflects the current body of nutrition science, so it helps health professionals and policymakers guide Americans to make healthy food and beverage choices, and serves as a science-based foundation for vital nutrition policies and programs across the country. The history of poor eating and physical activity patterns, as mentioned earlier, have a cumulative effect and have contributed significant nutrition-related health changes that the US population now faces. So the dietary guidelines is an important part of a complex, multifaceted solution to promote health and help reduce the risk of chronic diseases, including cardiovascular disease. So I included in this slide here, this part because the American Dietary Guidelines consider cardiovascular disease and their risk factors when making these guidelines because it affects so much of our population. Nutritional needs should be met primarily from foods. Okay, this can include fresh, canned, dried, and frozen foods. Foods in nutrient-dense forms contain essential vitamins and minerals, and also dietary fiber that have positive health effects. So I've mentioned eating pattern a time or two, and I like to elaborate on the definition of eating patterns. Components of an eating pattern can have an interactive and cumulative effect on health. So research is really starting to examine the relationship between our overall eating pattern, health, and risk of chronic diseases. It's often a red flag to me when certain diets leave out food groups. Fruits are bad, or these veggies are bad, or meats are bad. All food groups in a heart-healthy diet can have a synergistic effect. They can work together when put together to help our health, rather than when eaten alone or excluded. The American Dietary Guidelines provide recommendations for these food groups, which we'll review today. Remember, most of the calories in these guidelines are going to be for nutrient-dense foods, and only a limited number of the remaining calories are for other uses. So let's jump into it. First, we're going to discuss the fats in our diet. So true or false, all fat is equally bad for us and equally affects our health. Hopefully you're thinking about this, and we'll come back to this question. So let's discuss the types of fat found in food. So we can find cholesterol in our food choices. Remember, the body makes cholesterol in the liver for physiological and structural functions, but makes more than enough for these purposes. Okay, so it's not always essential that we get excess amounts of cholesterol in our food. In 2010, the dietary guidelines recommended limiting cholesterol to less than 300 milligrams per day. However, in 2015, this recommendation was not included. In 2015, the dietary guidelines made a pretty bold statement that said dietary cholesterol is no longer a nutrient of concern for overconsumption. So that means that the dietary cholesterol doesn't automatically become cholesterol in our blood. But what we have found is that saturated fats and trans fats actually affect our blood cholesterol levels more than dietary cholesterol alone does. This doesn't mean that limiting cholesterol is not important. We should still aim to eat as little as possible. However, what we do want to do is limit the saturated fats and trans fats in our diet. So saturated fat can trigger our liver to make more cholesterol and can increase the amount of cholesterol in our blood. Saturated fats are also a solid at room temperature. The scientific rationale for decreasing dietary intake of saturated fat has been and remains based on a well-established effects of saturated fat to raise LDL cholesterol. Okay, so too much can raise our LDL, which is a leading cause of atherosclerosis, the hardening of our arteries. So where does saturated fat comes from? Primarily from animal products, beef, skin of the poultry, bacon, sausage, full fat and reduced fat dairy products like milk, yogurt, cheese, and ice cream, butter, and then some plant-based products, coconut oil, palm oil. And as I mentioned earlier, saturated fats are solid at room temperature. You'll notice how a jar of coconut oil is solid at room temperature. Bacon fat, solid at room temperature. Main sources of saturated fat in the United States comes from mixed dishes containing cheese, meat, or both. So burgers, sandwiches, tacos, pizza, fried foods. So how much should we be limiting ourselves to? Well, the American Dietary Guidelines recommends less than 10% of our calories from saturated fat. So based on a 2,000 calorie diet, that's less than 22 grams per day. The American Heart Association recommends a little less. They say no more than 5 to 6% of our calories from saturated fat. Based on a 2,000 calorie diet, that's less than 13 grams a day of saturated fat. So here's our nutrition label to the side. When we're reading a nutrition facts label, the first thing we want to look at is the serving size. Okay, right here. So the serving size is 2/3 cup. We can see that there's 8 servings in the container. Then we want to go down to saturated fat. Nice rule of thumb is to aim for less than 2 grams of saturated fat per serving on the label. Okay, and that can help us stay under our daily goal of saturated fat. Here are some common sources of saturated fats and then the amount that's in them. So you can see just 3 ounces of an 80-20 gram beef is 5.6 grams. Okay, and then we're going to put an ounce of cheddar cheese on top of it for another 5.5 grams. And an ounce of cheese is typically about a slice for the size of 2 Dominoes. Okay, so it's not a lot of cheese. Butter is 7 grams of saturated fat per tablespoon, and then coconut oil comes in at almost double at 12 grams of saturated fat per tablespoon. So hopefully you're thinking about how you can lower your saturated fat intake. Okay. So a couple of suggestions here. Choosing lean cuts of meat can be helpful. So cutting off that visible marbly fat, that's the saturated fat. Taking the skin off of poultry. Choosing non-fat or low-fat dairy products, especially if your intake of milk, cheese, yogurt, and ice cream is high. You know, practice portion control, but also maybe look for those lower fat options. Limit butter, use olive oil, avocado oil, canola oil instead, and then of course practice portion control. We also want to be sure to limit the trans fats in our diet. Most of the trans fats we've consumed are formed through a manufacturing process called hydrogenation. It's where hydrogen is added to vegetable oil, and it converts that liquid into a semi-solid at room temperature. So this creates partially hydrogenated oils, which might be a familiar term to some of you, and they've been the major sources of trans fat in our food. we use partially hydrogenated oils in our food because they extend the shelf life of our food, and they also made it taste good. So the most common sources of trans fat in our diet have been bakery products, vegetable shortening, margarine, frozen pizzas, non-dairy creamers, microwave popcorn, canned frosting. And like saturated fats increase the LDL, or bad cholesterol in the blood, trans fats not only also increase the LDL in our blood, but they also lower our good cholesterol, that HDL. So in 2015, the FDA announced that partially hydrogenated oils are no longer generally recognized as safe. And finally, in 2018, the FDA said we're no longer allowed to add these partially hydrogenated oils or trans fat to our food. Okay, so they're using other fats, but we shouldn't be finding trans fat in our food anymore, which is a good thing. So what do we want to have? Well, the strong and consistent evidence shows that when we take saturated fats out of our diet, we want to replace them with unsaturated fats. And that's associated with reducing our total cholesterol and our LDL as well. Strong and consistent evidence also shows that replacing saturated fats with polyunsaturated fatty acids is associated with a reduced risk of cardiovascular events and cardiovascular disease-related deaths. So here are sources of unsaturated fats in our diet, the ones that we want to get: olive oil, avocado oil, canola, avocados, olives, peanut butter, and other nuts and nut butters are good sources of unsaturated fats. Sesame seeds, pumpkin, chia, and flax seeds as well are good sources of unsaturated fats to include in our diet. Specifically in our unsaturated fat family, we have these omega-3 fatty acids, which I'm sure some of you or most of you are familiar with or heard of them. Omega-3s are essential fatty acids, which means our body doesn't make them. It's important we get them through our diet. You can see some of the benefits listed here below: decreasing our total cholesterol and triglycerides, decreasing our blood pressure, and then our risk of heart disease deaths. Sources of omega-3s, well, we can get them from plants, ground flaxseed, pumpkin seeds, chia seeds, walnuts, and then fatty fish. So, all fish is nice and lean and fine. These fish specifically just have higher amounts of omega-3s in them: salmon, tuna, trout, mackerel, sardines. Okay, so here are a couple of suggestions of how to get fatty acids, omega-3 fatty acids, into your diet during the week. So aim for about 4 ounces of fatty fish twice per week. Okay, you can also try ground flaxseed, chia seeds, pumpkin seeds, mixing them into your oatmeal, yogurt, or smoothies, or eating walnuts as a snack or topping them on top of salads or breakfast cereals. So just a couple simple changes that you can add into your diet. Now, I mentioned these chia seeds a couple of times, so I thought I'd throw them on a slide for you, just in case you're not familiar with them. So in the top left there is a picture of what those seeds look like. They're little tiny black seeds. They don't alter the taste of your food. They're a great source of omega-3s, a good source of protein, and soluble fiber, which helps keep us full in between meal. And soluble fiber, which we're going to talk about later as well, also has added benefits like lowering cholesterol, controlling blood sugars, and increasing satiety. So here's a little recipe below of a chia seed pudding. That's a most common way to use these chia seeds. Again, you can also throw them on top of oatmeal, yogurt, put them on salads, throw them in smoothies. They're very versatile. Now, ground flax seeds are very similar to chia seeds as well. So in the top left, I have a picture of what they look like. The seeds on the left are whole flax seeds, and on the right in that spoon is the ground flax seed. And we do want to make sure that we consume flax seeds when they're ground, because it makes the nutrients in them more bioavailable when we eat them. Very versatile. Again, put them in oatmeal, yogurt, smoothies, salads. Great source of omega-3s, protein, and soluble fiber. Okay. So just a couple of suggestions here of how to choose our heart-healthy fats and get them into our diet. Using oils instead of butter, trying maybe some more plant-based meals to lower the saturated fat, raw or unsalted nuts as snacks or toppings of breakfast foods or salads, nut butter with apples or celery. Trying avocado in place of mayo is always a great idea too. So the message with the fats in our diet that we wanted to replace the saturated fats, and when we eliminate them with unsaturated fats to help lower our levels of total cholesterol and that bad LDL. It also helps lower our risk of cardiovascular disease related deaths. So back to the original question I asked, true or false? All fat is equally bad for us and equally affects our health. That is false. Dietary fat's essential. Remember, it's the types of fat that matter. So we want to limit that saturated fat and choose our unsaturated fats. Any questions about dietary fats? All right. So next we're going to talk about sodium in our diet. And why should we limit sodium? Well, sodium accumulates. The body holds on to water to dilute the sodium in our blood. This increases both the amount of fluid surrounding the cells and the volume of blood in the bloodstream. Increased blood volume means more work for the heart and more pressure on blood vessels. Over time, the extra work and pressure can stiffen blood vessels, leading to high blood pressure, heart attack, and stroke. It can also lead to heart failure. There's also some evidence that too much salt can damage the heart, aorta, and kidneys without increasing blood pressure, and that it may be bad for our bones too. Some of you may be thinking, well, I don't add salt to my food, so I'm fine. I'm not eating too much sodium. And I say to you, not so fast. But first, let's talk about salt. Sodium is part of salt, and those terms are used interchangeably. Salt across the board, sea salt, Himalayan pink salt, table salt, is equal, okay? It's all 40% sodium by volume and 60% chloride, okay? So not one of these options is lower in sodium than the other. They're all the same. They all equal each other, okay? Sodium is a mineral in our body that we need. It is important for us to have. It helps us maintain fluid balance, pH balance, muscle contractions, transmitting nerves. But the problem is, like some other things in our diet, we tend to get too much, okay? And I found this funny little meme too I always like to share. It says, healthy Himalayan pink salt is rich in key minerals like calcium, magnesium, and iron. And the truth is, even if you ate a full tablespoon of it 3 times the maximum recommendation, you get 0% of your daily value of those minerals. So you're not getting extra benefits from choosing these pink salts. You're going to get good sources of calcium, magnesium, and iron from fruits and vegetables. So I always like to review a couple of numbers when I first discuss our sodium intake. The first number here is 3,436. That's the average daily intake of sodium per person estimated by the American Heart Association. So in between 3,000 and 4,000 milligrams a day. 90% is the percentage of Americans aged 2 and older that eat too much sodium. 200 milligrams is the amount of salt your body needs daily. Now, this is not the goal that I'm telling you to achieve. Our body can handle more salt than that. However, it only needs 200 milligrams per day. 2,300 milligrams. That is the recommended daily allowance of sodium in our diet. It's what they recommend us to have each day. 2,300 milligrams is also the amount of sodium in 1 teaspoon of salt. So 1 teaspoon of salt is 2,300 milligrams of sodium. With that being said, I shift over to the right side of this slide. Only 5% of our sodium intake comes from added salt while eating. More than 70% of the sodium in our diet comes from processed and restaurant foods. Okay, so couple of things here. Step one is obviously, we want to eliminate added salt, but because most of our sodium comes from processed and prepared foods, reading the nutrition facts label and then limiting our processed and prepared foods is very important to help lower the sodium intake in our diet. So the American Dietary Guidelines, again, recommends less than 2,300 milligrams a day. The American Heart Association is a little less. They recommend 1,500 to 2,000 milligrams a day. So how can we achieve this? Back to the label. So remember, the first thing we want to look at on the food label is the serving size. So the serving size here is 1 cup, and the number, there are 2 servings per container. So per cup, I can see that it's 340 milligrams of sodium per serving. So when we're looking at these labels, we do want to try to choose foods that are less than 140 milligrams of sodium per serving. Okay, if it's under 140 per serving, it's a low sodium food. Once that number gets over 300 milligrams of sodium per serving, like it is on this label, we're getting a little high. Okay, and that's when I want you to look to see if there's a lower sodium option. Maybe you can get away with half of the serving size, or maybe within your entire day's budget, you could still kind of fit this food in. Or maybe you just have to avoid this food. A nice rule of thumb is to aim for about 500 milligrams of sodium per meal. So breakfast, lunch, and dinner, that gets you to 1,500 milligrams and leaves you an extra 500 milligrams for snacks and beverages. And yes, beverages can contain sodium too, so make sure you're looking at those labels as well. Here are a couple of ingredients on a food label that you might see that do contain sodium. And let's talk about label claims. So all of the stuff written on the front of the label, very overwhelming, can be very misleading as well. I don't expect you to memorize this table, but I put it up here because I like to point out a few things. So if something says low sodium, okay, it has a number criteria. That means that it is 140 milligrams of sodium per serving or less, the low sodium food. Now, if something says lower sodium or reduced sodium, it just means that it's reduced by at least 25%. Okay, so foods marked lower or reduced sodium can still be very high in sodium. Okay, that's my point here. Don't be misled by what something might say on the front of it. You always have to go back and check this nutrition facts label, okay, and read the actual numbers. Here are a couple examples of foods with those claims on them. And let's practice a little bit. So first I want to tell you that this is the newer nutrition facts label that should be rolling out on all foods here pretty soon within the next year or two. You can see there's 2 columns on this nutrition facts label. The first column here is the nutrition facts per serving, and then we have the nutrition facts per can. So the math is done for us because we typically do eat the entire can of soup. You can see over here, the soup says reduced sodium. You can see per can, it still has a 1,020 milligrams of sodium per can. That's half of the day's worth almost. So this reduced sodium soup is still pretty high in sodium. Okay, so just another example of why we always need to turn the item around and read the nutrition facts label. The American Heart Association has coined the salty sticks. So breads and rolls can be a source of sodium. Baking soda and baking powder are commonly used in baking and do contain sodium. Salt is also used in baking as well. Cold cuts and cured meats. Any sort of processed meat is a big offender of sodium in our diet. Lunch meat, ham, hot dogs, bacon, sausage, even the turkey products, okay? The turkey bacon, the turkey hot dogs, chicken hot dogs, they are all still very high in sodium. Okay, a serving size of ham can run at 600 to 1,000 milligrams of sodium. A hot dog can run 400 to 500 milligrams of sodium. These don't come low sodium, folks. They come lower, but they're still high in sodium. Pizza can contribute a large amount of sodium to our diet as well, with the crust, the sauce, the processed meats on top. Okay, that can add up pretty quickly. Sodium levels in poultry can vary based on preparation methods. Okay, you'll find a wide range of sodium in poultry products, so it's important to choose wisely. The poultry that's going to come marinated tends to be higher in sodium. Poultry that you're going to get at a deli or at a fast food will also be higher in sodium too, because it's typically soaked in a salty brine, and that's how it stays so juicy when you eat it. Plain chicken breasts that you're going to buy at the store tend to be lower in sodium. Soup in a can is a very big offender of sodium in our diet. One, because there's typically multiple servings in the can, so we have to multiply the sodium per serving by the amount of servings we're going to have. Dried soup mixes, Lipton soup, ramen noodles, they can all be very high too. Soups that you're going to find at restaurants, even if they are, quote, homemade at that restaurant, can still be big offenders of sodium as well. 1 can of chicken noodle soup is 2,200 milligrams of sodium. Okay, that's your day's worth right there. And then burritos and tacos can contribute sodium to our diet. There are a variety of salt-free taco seasoning recipes out there that you could make at home and use, which would be a much better option than what you're going to find in the packet. So here's a nice little table of some high sodium foods, some I've already talked about, and some low sodium options. So using herbs and spices instead of table salt is great. Choosing fresh meats instead of processed meats. Or processed cheeses, American and Velveeta specifically, can be big offenders. Condiments can add up pretty quickly as well. Ketchup, soy sauce, another one that comes lower sodium, but not low. Okay, and teriyaki sauce are very high in sodium. Anything in a can can be very high in sodium. So canned beans, vegetables, and tomato products are big offenders. Couple of things there. If you have any regular canned goods at home, for now, put them in a colander and rinse them off really, really well before using them. Okay, and that can help get rid of some of the sodium on there. Moving forward, next time you do some grocery shopping, look for canned goods that say no salt added on the front of them or low sodium. Okay, those are going to be nice low sodium options for you to choose. Commonly found at Wise, Giant, Del Monte brand has no salt added and low sodium. Snack foods, chips, pretzels, bagged popcorn, salted nuts can all be very high in sodium as well. Unsalted nuts and unsalted air popped popcorn at home are great snacks. TV dinners can be a big source of sodium as well, and convenience foods. So if we're getting frozen meals, or we're buying frozen or pre-packaged meals for a loved one that maybe is too sick to cook right now, really try to keep them around 500 milligrams or less per meal. Okay, and then restaurant foods are big offenders of sodium as well. So use the internet if you can, plan ahead before dining out, and look at their menu and try to choose some low sodium meals when eating out. A little quiz here: which has more sodium? 1 large slice of raisin bread or 1 small slice of French bread? You can see that the small slice of French bread actually has a little bit more sodium. So bread is going to have salt in it. An average slice of bread contains about 130 milligrams of sodium. You can make your own bread sodium-free if you'd like to. There are a couple of brands out there that are lower in sodium, if you'd like to seek those out as well. Which has more sodium here? 2 tablespoons of the reduced fat Italian dressing, or 2 tablespoons of the reduced fat ranch dressing. So remember, when we take the fat out of something, what are they going to replace it with? Typically salt or sugar, okay? So sometimes, with that being said, that's why you might hear that just getting the regular product is better, and depending on what your needs are. So you can see here that the reduced fat Italian dressing is pretty high in sodium. 2 tablespoons is 410 milligrams. So hopefully you're thinking about how to decrease your sodium intake. Spices and herbs are the best way to make food taste good and still be salt-free. Limiting processed meats, consuming less prepackaged meals, choosing lower sodium products, rinsing any canned veggies or beans you might have at home, skipping salty condiments and salty snacks is also a great idea as well. And label reading is going to help you do all of this. So here are a couple of salt-free blends that are out there to choose from. Now with the Spice Hunter, not all of this stuff is salt-free, but there are a large selection of spices that are salt-free. And we can't forget good old Mrs. Dash, which actually comes in a big variety of flavors. Citrus is also a great way to add flavor to your food too without using salt. Zesting, juicing, mixing with other acids. You can add fresh juice to pan sauce after it's removed to heat. Zesting is great. You can do that on top of any sort of dish or casserole or salad. Citrus and vinegar also is great for mixing in dishes and a nice topping for salad too. The biggest mistake is not having any on hand. If you have any questions about sodium, feel free to type into the chat now and ask. We're going to move on to added sugars. Something else that we want to limit in our diet. All right, so let's talk about added sugars a little bit. 1 teaspoon of sugar equals 4 grams of sugar. The average 12-ounce regular soda has about 10 teaspoons of added sugar in it. That's 40 grams of added sugar. That is a lot. The amount of added sugar that most adults consume per day is 20 teaspoons. That's 320 calories per day. That's 14 more teaspoons than what's recommended. All right, so if we're having 14 more teaspoons per day than what's recommended, on top of the base calories that we need, that can contribute to an excessive amount of weight gain in 1 year. So just kind of identifying the amount of added sugar in your diet and cutting back can be a simple way to lose weight and very beneficial for your overall health and heart health too. And now with this new label here, you can see this new row includes 10 grams of added sugar. We can look at the label and actually quantify how much sugar they're adding into our food now, which is going to help us keep that intake lower. So where do added sugars come from? Well, to tell if a food has added sugar, we can look at the list of ingredients. Sugar has many names and usually ends in OSE, like dextrose, maltose, sucrose, glucose. Added sugar also includes high fructose corn syrup, molasses, cane sugar, organic sugar, agave, corn sweetener, syrup, honey, fruit juice concentrates. Sugar is sugar, my friends. It doesn't matter where it comes from. So the American Dietary Guidelines recommends limiting added sugar to less than 10% of our calories per day. Based on a 2,000 calorie diet, that's 50 grams or less per day of added sugar. As you can see above, or here on the slide, the American Heart Association's recommendations are a bit stricter. Okay, so for women, they recommend 25 grams a day or less. For men, they recommend 36 grams a day or less. Strong evidence shows that eating patterns that include lower intake of sources of added sugars are associated with a reduced risk of cardiovascular disease in adults. That's a big deal. There's moderate evidence that indicates these eating patterns are associated with lower risk of obesity, type 2 diabetes, and some type of cancers in adults. Okay, so all good and important reasons to help lower the added sugars in our diet. A couple additional sources of sugar, added sugar, is our cereals, granola bars, yogurts. Okay, of course, beverages are going to have a lot of sugar in them, pastries, desserts, things like that. So when we're looking at this label, again, take a look at that added sugar row, and women see how much is this contributing to your 25-gram limit, and men, how much is that contributing to your 36-gram limit for the day, and try to see if you can adhere to that. Okay, so when we are limiting these simple carbohydrates in our diet, we want to replace them with whole grain, high fiber foods. So let's talk about some things to include in your diet. One of those is dietary fiber. Okay, the heart healthy component. Getting adequate sources of fiber in our diet is going to be good for us. So you can see here, 15 grams is the average daily intake. Only 5% of Americans are meeting the recommended intake of fiber. So take a look at this chart here, see where you can be, and ask yourself, are you getting enough fiber? Maybe you're asking, where does fiber come from? So we have two types of fiber in our diet. We have insoluble fiber. This acts like a broom. It moves digested food through the intestine. So it prevents constipation, it adds bulk, it reduces our risk of irritable bowel syndrome and diverticular disease. Good sources of insoluble fiber include whole grains, whole wheat bread, cereals, brown rice, nuts, seeds, broccoli, cabbage, the roughage kind of vegetables. Then we have our soluble fiber. Soluble fiber helps lower that LDL, bad cholesterol, by reducing the absorption of cholesterol into your bloodstream. Soluble fiber also slows digestion, which helps control blood sugar levels, and aids in fullness, keeping us full in between meals, which helps with weight loss. So good sources of soluble fiber include oatmeal, beans, legumes, dried peas, nuts and seeds, apples, pears, and strawberries. What do these two lists have in common here? Well, fiber comes from plant foods, okay, vegetables, fruits, whole grains, okay, which are also high in vitamins, minerals, and fiber. Obviously, we're talking about that here. And they're low in calories. So the goal, okay, is to try to get more than 4.5, 5 cups a day of fruits and vegetables. So hopefully you're thinking about how you can increase your fiber intake. Remember, when we start to do that, go slow with increasing the fiber and increase the water consumption as you go. Vegetables, as I mentioned, are a great source of fiber in our diet. 3 to 5 servings a day is a great idea. Serving size is typically a half cup portion of cooked or raw vegetables, or a 1 cup portion of raw spinach is a serving size of vegetable. Make sure you get all different colors: leafy green vegetables, red and orange vegetables, purple, yellow vegetables. Legumes, which are beans, also count as vegetables too, are an excellent source of fiber. Fruits, we'd like to get 3 to 5 servings of fruits per day too. Ideally, we would want at least half of our fruit to be whole fruit. All of our fruit being whole fruit would be fabulous as well. If we're going to have fruit juice, make sure it's 100% fruit juice. Remember though that if we choose juice, we're missing out on good fiber, okay? Canned fruit is fine. We want it packed in its own juices or packed in water. And if we're gonna have dried fruit, remember, 1/4 cup is 1 serving. Okay, dried fruit is fine, but this can add up in calories pretty quickly as well if we don't follow portion control. Whole grains are another good source of dietary fiber. We want half of our grains to be whole grains. Okay, so that includes The whole grain has all three parts of the grain, the endosperm, the germ, the bran, which provides us with fiber, protein, essential B vitamins that we need in our diet. The whole grains include whole wheat flour, oats, brown rice, popcorn, bulgur, barley, all good things we should be getting in our diet. We do want to limit the amount of refined grains, okay? They're processed, they're removing the bran and the germ, therefore removing fiber, iron, protein, and some B vitamins. Refined grains are gonna be found in sugary cereals, white breads, baked goods, things that are processed. And then another source of fiber are going to be beans and legumes, excellent foods to really try to get more and incorporate more into our diet. These are also plant-based sources of protein too. A half a cup is a serving. Examples include black beans, kidney beans, chickpeas, lentils, nuts and seeds, and some soy products. Okay, so hopefully you're thinking about how to get some more fiber into your diet, whether it's to help lose weight or lower your cholesterol or obtain better blood sugar control. And I'm going to cover fluids. So getting staying hydrated is very important. Try to aim for mostly water and limit beverages with added sugar, which can also have sodium in there too. So, limit the soda, lemonade, fruit juices, sports drinks. If you do consume alcohol, check with your doctor, of course. Only do so in moderation. And practice portion control. And we're going to talk a little bit about portion control too, because I've talked about a lot of foods. So let's talk about how much we should be having. So this is my plate method. We used to have the pyramid, which I'm sure most of you remember, with grains on the bottom, and it would go up from there. But this is how our plate should look at meals, okay? And hopefully you're thinking about whether or not your plate resembles this. We want half of our plate to be non-starchy vegetables, okay? So our starchy vegetables are peas, potatoes, and corn, and lima beans. Our non-starchy vegetables include everything else: greens, carrots, peppers, onions, celery, broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, asparagus. Those are all non-starchy vegetables. We want to have a vegetable at every meal if possible. 1 to 2 cups is a good serving. Okay, we can have fruit at our meal, or we can choose to have it in between meals. Again, a half a cup to a cup is a nice serving size per meal or snack. A good source of protein at our meal is important, whether it come from plant-based sources like beans or soy products, or it come from meats. 3 to 4 ounces is a good serving size for protein per meals. And then we have our grains. So that's going to be our starch, okay? So either for this orange triangle at the top right of your plate, it's going to be peas, potatoes, or corn, or rice, pasta, breads, any sort of those starchy grain products, all right? About a half a cup to a cup is a good serving size to start with for the starch of our meal. Okay, so the average woman's fist is about a cup. You don't have a measuring cup at home. 3 ounces of cooked meat or 4 ounces of raw meat is about the size of a deck of cards or the palm of your hand. Hopefully these visuals here can help you out a little bit with serving sizes. And hopefully you're thinking about, how you can make your plate look like this. Do you need to cut back on your portion of starches? Do you need more vegetables? Do you need to choose a lean protein? So a couple of eating patterns to consider. The Mediterranean diet. If you're looking for, an eating pattern to follow, this is one that I would recommend. The Mediterranean diet is a way of eating based on the traditional cuisine of countries bordering the Mediterranean Sea. There's no single definition of the Mediterranean diet, but the cuisine itself is high in vegetables, fruits, whole grains, beans, nuts and seeds, and olive oil. So meals are based around these components instead of being based around meat like we commonly do here in the United States. The interest in the Mediterranean diet began in the 60s when they observed that coronary heart disease caused fewer deaths in the Mediterranean countries than in the US. So again, these meals are revolved around plant-based foods. Butter is replaced with olive oil. Herbs and spices are used to flavor food instead of salt. Red meat is limited to a couple of times per month. Fish, poultry, eggs, and dairy are consumed a couple of times per week. Something else I really enjoy about this diet is that meals are enjoyed with family and friends, and regular physical activity is encouraged. Here are a couple of resources for the Mediterranean diet if you're interested. Another suggestion I commonly provide is try a couple of recipes per week. You don't have to jump into this, 100% right away, but maybe slowly start to integrate it into your diet and try it that way if this is something that you want to be sustainable with. But there are a ton of really good, tasty Mediterranean recipes out there, okay, that I'm going to encourage you to try. Another eating pattern that I recommend is the DASH diet. So the DASH diet, DASH stands for Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension. This diet was designed to help treat or prevent high blood pressure and was developed by the NIH to lower blood pressure without the use of medications. So this is an evidence-based diet as well. It emphasizes vegetables, fruits, low-fat dairy foods, moderate amounts of whole grains, fish, poultry, and nuts. It encourages you to reduce the sodium in your diet to 2,300 milligrams or less. Some of the DASH diets are even 1,500 milligrams or less. It also encourages a variety of nutrient-rich foods like fruits and vegetables and whole grains that are good sources of potassium, calcium, and magnesium, which has also been shown to help lower blood pressure as well. Other benefits of the DASH diet have also been shown to be weight loss, lowering cholesterol, and managing or preventing heart disease. And here are a couple of resources, again, for the DASH diet. Okay, so those are the two diet patterns that I would recommend. The third one is a plant-based diet, if that's something you're interested as well. I think I've kind of hammered that in, how good plants are for us. So anytime that you can incorporate them into your diet is a great idea. We're going to talk about review the nutrition facts label. I showed this to you when we were discussing fats and sodium, and I did talk about a new label. So I wanted to just put them side to side. On the left here is the label that we've seen forever on foods. On the right is the new nutrition facts label that's rolling out. There are a couple of things different. You can see the serving size font is larger, the calorie font is larger, and there's that new row I mentioned called included added sugar. And then the micronutrients on the bottom are a little different as well. So hopefully next time you go to the store, the numbers on the label will be a little more clear for you and you'll be more informed to make a good decision when looking for heart-healthy foods. So next we're going to cover restaurants, because eating out, dining out is frequent, happens a lot, and it's been thought and studied and considered that a lot of the calories Americans consume come from restaurant meals. Over 30% of the calories. The average restaurant meal contains about 1,000 calories. Okay, so there's a lot of thought that this contributes to being overweight and being obese in our country. So we're going to take a look at some popular meal items and then some nice substitutes for them. Okay, So remember, it's always important to plan and prepare when you're dining out. So first we're gonna go to Red Lobster. You can see that 2 Cheddar Bay biscuits here running about 320 calories, 20 grams of fat, and 760 milligrams of sodium. When combined with the Ultimate Feast, the grand total, 1,440 calories, almost 100 grams of fat, and 4,100 milligrams of sodium. Twice the recommended amount for the day. All right, so that's quite a lot. When reviewing the menu, I found this nice substitute. So using that plate method, we would get a good source of protein, the salmon, also rich in omega-3s, remember. A good source of vegetables, steamed vegetables on the side. Make sure you ask them not to add salt to your food. That's always really important. And then the rice pilaf here for the starch. Gives us a nice balanced diet at Red Lobster. Our next restaurant is going to be Olive Garden. So 2 breadsticks will come in at 280 calories, 740 milligrams of sodium. Salad with dressing, which I think most people probably consider harmless. That dressing is really, really high in sodium, folks. So just remember that. That salad with dressing is 770 milligrams of sodium. And then combined with the tour of Italy, we have a grand total of almost 2,000 calories, 110 grams of fat, and 4,700 milligrams of sodium. That's a big deal. That's a lot. So a nice alternative would be the spaghetti with meat sauce, top with some garden veggies and maybe some grilled chicken, and then you could still get a steamed broccoli as a side there. Next, we're going to visit Outback Steakhouse. So the Bloomin' Onion appetizer comes in at 1,950 calories, 155 grams of fat, and 3,840 milligrams of sodium. And then for some reason, they decided to create the loaded Bloomin' Onion, which isn't any better. Unfortunately, when reviewing this menu, they really didn't have any options that were very low in fat or sodium. Okay, so the best one I could find was the grilled shrimp on the Barbie. Keep in mind, frozen seafood, shellfish, when they freeze it in a salty brine. So sometimes you might notice that frozen seafood is a little saltier. So when you can, choose the fresh stuff. That way, it's not soaked and frozen in a salty brine. It's going to be a little lower in sodium for you. Next is pizza. So you can see here 2 slices of our large original pan meat lovers pizza is 900 calories, 52 grams of fat, and almost 2,000 milligrams of sodium. 2,000 milligrams, so our day's worth in 2 slices of pizza. A couple of options here. Pizza Hut has the Veggie Lovers Skinny Pizza. Mod pizzas also become pretty popular too. It's like the Subways for pizza. So you can go in and get your 6-inch crust, get your red sauce, and then load the top of your pizza with fruits and vegetables, which is an option, if you're having that craving. Something else you could do is make it at home yourself. So, get a crust. You can make your own dough. You can find one that's pre-made, that's lower in sodium and fat. Use fresh mozzarella. These ingredients here, easy to make your own pizza sauce if you want to. Sometimes we add a little bit of lemon juice to our pizza sauce that we make at home. And then go heavy with the vegetables on top, or prepare your own proteins that aren't processed and are lower sodium to put on top of your pizza. It's a really fun family activity to do, and it's pretty easy to do as well. And that way you have control of what's going on your pizza, rather than not having control when you order out. So hopefully you've opened your eyes to, what restaurant meals can contribute to our diet. Just a couple of tips. Check the restaurant website before you go. Okay, consider skipping the appetizers. Maybe share your entree, or, pack away half of your meal before you even get started and take home a doggy bag. Use the plate method, skip your high calorie drinks. So that about wraps up the components of a heart-healthy diet and how to apply those when we're shopping and eating out. I hope this has offered some clarity to you. If you have any questions, please let me know. I'm going to provide you with my contact information at the end. You're welcome to call or email me with any questions. I do like to cover just physical activity because that is a big component of overall health. So of course, check with your physician before starting. If you have suffered from a heart attack, stent, open heart surgery, and you've been referred to cardiac rehab, please check it out and please take that referral and go. It's a tailored physical activity regimen to improve your endurance and strength of your heart. We'll offer you nutrition education, stress management, smoking cessation, and just overall heart healthy education too during your stay here. It's a really, really wonderful program. Exercise is important. So to just get started, 10 minutes 2 times a day with the ultimate goal of 150 minutes each week. A couple of tips, remember that 10 minutes of exercise 3 times a day is the same thing as 30 minutes once a day. All right, so however you get it in matters. It's important. Find an exercise that you like. That's going to make it sustainable. All right. So a couple of takeaway things: practice portion control, especially with saturated fats, sodium, added sugars, and refined grains. Increase your intake of fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans, and legumes. Read your food labels and keep moving. We do have a Helping Heart support group. You can find this on the WellSpan website under events. It's the 3rd Monday of each month. Typically it's at the WellSpan Rehab Hospital. Lately it's been via Zoom. So just sign up and you'll be contacted on how this event will take place. Each month features a speaker. Discussions are relevant to cardiac issues. This is open to anyone that wants to join. If you have additional questions, you can call Julie Bricker at 717-741-8280. And here's my contact information if you have any questions or concerns. I want to thank you for joining us today, and hopefully you learned a little something and are going to start working to modify your risk factors a little bit. Thank you. Have a good day.